So if you remember, solo growth model basically. So yeah, I believe all of you have done solo growth model in chapter in 302, equal 302. Can someone give me some insight about the solo growth model? What does this solo growth model about? Like, what does it? What is the conclusion? What are the conclusions that you can draw from this model?
So it has something to do with capital accumulation.
Okay. Uh, so, what is about capital accumulation? What does it say? What does solo growth model say about capital accumulation?
Sorry,
Bisharat Hussain.
that developing countries or poor countries are gonna have a faster rate of capital accumulation than developed economies because I think they are already quite advanced. So
Not really. That was not the conclusion. Bisharat Hussain Arafat. Can you tell us what are some of the main thing that you get from solo growth model?
Mm, not really, sir.
From the Yasmin, Milan Hussain,
Yes, sir.
same question.
I cannot understand, sir.
Can you tell us some of the conclusions that we got from some of the conclusions of the solo growth model?
Well, sir, I can remember one of it was in the long run. Am I supposed to speak?
Yeah, go ahead. It's fine, I guess. Since
Well, sir, in the long run, the growth rate does not depend on the savings rate.
growth does not depend on what?
Savings rate,
Okay. So it's not exact. Okay. So the basically,
and
uh,
also probably in the steady state, the capital stock and output both grows at a same rate with the labor force.
those are not really the conclusion that we draw from the solo growth model. But speak. Okay. Anyone else want to share their thoughts about the solo growth model here?
Sir, this is the long run growth, and it this is the key component of economic growth is saving and investment.
Sorry, basically, the main conclusion is probably it cannot account for the physical capital in the long run compared to growth.
Yeah, so one of the conclusion, as yeah, you're right about the idea that one of the main conclusion that we get from solo growth model is that in the short run you can have economic growth through capital accumulation, but in the long run, capital accumulation cannot give you sustained long run economic growth. In the long run, you for your growth you have to have new technology, better technology, technological innovation, so that for economic growth in the long run. And solo growth model does not really tell you where the technological innovation is coming from. That's why sometimes the solo growth model is known as exogenous growth model, because technological innovation in this model is exogenous. I think Hasibur Rahman or Hasib. Uh,
জি স্যার, আমি এটাই বলতে চেয়েছিলাম, টেকনোলজিক্যাল ইমপ্রুভমেন্ট।
right. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Some of the things that we have in here. Um, The reason solo growth model cannot generate long-run economic growth is because of the diminishing marginal returns. So as you can see, these are the main conclusion that we get from solo growth model. So let's take a look at the solo growth model now. So this is our model, the production function we have. So this is our standard production function with constant returns to scale. And if you divide both sides by L, we get the output per person as a function of factor productivity times capital per person. Okay, this is our production function now. Function of production of output per worker. So basically we are expressing here everything in terms of per worker, and we can, if you remember the formula for capital accumulation, through some mathematical derivation, this is the formula that we come up with for accumulation of capital per person. Okay, so here you see this part represents the savings rate the economy is experiencing. Economy has savings. This S is the savings rate, and this is the production function per output per person. So savings rate times the output per person is basically going to be your savings per person, minus delta is the depreciation rate, and N is the growth rate of population. Okay, so basically this equation is telling you the change in capital, which is basically your investment. The change in capital is net investment. So change in capital is equal to the total savings that you have minus the depreciated capital per person. So delta times K is the depreciated capital per person, and minus N times K is the necessary growth in capital per person for the population growth. Okay. So when the economy is in steady state, if you remember the steady state thing, change in capital per person is going to be equal to 0, and the other endogenous variables are going to remain unchanged in the steady state. So if you define K star as the steady state value of capital per person here, the small k, then you can write down this change in capital stock is equal to 0. So this is the equation that you end up with when the economy is in steady state. So graphically, we can plot this graph. So this is a graph. So the upper dotted line represents the production function. I believe you remember this graph. A similar graph that we discussed in Eco 302. So this is the upper dotted line is the total product function. So everything here is in per capita term. Okay, keep this in mind, everyone. Everything that we see here are in per capita terms or per worker terms. So output on the vertical axis is the output per worker. Capital on the horizontal axis is the capital per worker. Okay, now can someone tell us why would we be interested in, instead of total output, we are interested in per capita output? Hello?
Well, sir, we're considering growth here, so since the people would be a major factor here, like the growth of the economy.
I'm not sure what that answer my question. Can you repeat that, please?
Well, sir, I mean, it's just we are talking about the growth of an economy. So I guess we need to consider the people, how many people are there and how are they being. So per person capital would be a better measure in terms of the whole economy.
Why is that?
Well, obviously we need to divide the capital output among the people. I mean, like everyone is using that. So an economy with a small economy might have a larger output, but then again, it would not be as developed because of their
Yeah,
so
so
people.
basically what you're trying to say is that output per person would be a better measure of standard of living rather than the total output of the economy, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If you think about Luxembourg versus Bangladesh, the total output or GDP produced in Luxembourg is much smaller than that of Bangladesh. But if you look at the standard of living or the income of the people in Luxembourg is much richer than the people in Bangladesh, right? So when it comes to looking at the standard of living, per capita term would give you a better measure than the total output of the economy. So anyway, so thus in steady state, savings is going to be equal to the required investment, the investment necessary to replace the depreciated capital and keep up with the population growth rate of n, as you can see here. So here, and so this K star represents the steady state output level, and the gap between this point here and the relevant point on the top in the production version, the gap between these two gives you the total consumption level. And output, once we reach this point, basically the economy is not growing any longer. Okay, now when it comes to saving more, so economies can save more. For example, the savings rate could go up, and that once we raise our savings rate from S to, let's say, S bar or S prime, as in this graph, so the savings function shifts upward. With this upward shift of the savings function, as you can see, the economy moves from K star to K star prime. So the stock of capital per person is going up. So the economy is going to move slowly from K star to K star prime. And the new steady state is going to be established. This point is our new steady state value. But once again, once we reach this point, there will be no further economic growth. So to maintain economic growth, you need to constantly shift the total production function upward through technological innovation. Okay. So that is what we need to make sure that the economy is growing. I think that's it. Any questions here?
No, sir.
Not yet.
We already talked about this. So we are done with chapter 3. And now when is our exam?
You posted it will be on 18th.
18th, right? I think I posted something in there, right? In the
Yes, sir.
classroom. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Have you decided the syllabus yet?
I think we can stick to these 3 chapters, I guess. Let me see how many classes we have. How many more classes we have? So we have 1, 2. So we have 2 more classes excluding today. So I think I would be able to finish chapter 4 before the test, but there is a little bit of uncertainty. So what we can do is I can give you the test on the first 3 chapters. Okay. If we finish it early, then I mean it's okay, I guess. Or do you want this for chapter 4? There is a little bit of uncertainty. Okay, you have to keep this in mind.
Sir, up till chapter 3 is better.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. I think so.
Yeah, so in that case we can work. So I can give you your first midterm on the first 3 chapters. So that's fine.
Thank you, sir.
So yeah, let me edit that announcement. I'm going to edit that announcement. So I'm going to kind of include the syllabus now. So midterm 1 is on November 8. Midterm will cover materials chapter 1, 2, So can you can someone please check it in the Google Classroom and see if this is clear enough for you to understand what the syllabus is going to be?
Yes, sir. I believe it's clear enough.
Okay. Now let's start with some contemporary models. So this is chapter 4, and here we are going to discuss some of the things. So we have in chapter 3 we have discussed the classic theories. Generally, the standard growth theories are basically growth theories focuses on those items or those classic theories. But in addition to, so in practice, if you think about the developing countries, there are other issues. There are some issues that developing country that are relevant to the developing countries in particular, and so classic theories does not necessarily take those factors into account. If you remember the Herrmann growth model, Herrmann growth model or Lewis two-sector model, so main idea here is the capital accumulation. Capital accumulation is kind of going to generate uh, the long-run economic growth. But if you think about uh, the developing countries, so one thing is capital accumulation might not necessarily, if you think about Bangladesh, for example, if you put your money in, there are a lot of financial organizations in Bangladesh. I just saw a news today. I think Forest Finance or some company, some financial institutions, they have lost more than thousand crore taka. They cannot really account. Give the necessary documents, or they don't have the documentation of what this whole money went. Or you are probably familiar with Prashant Kumar Haldar or PK Haldar. This guy stole money and went to Canada, living in Canada. There are lots of other people stealing money from banks or other financial organizations and basically keeping them. So these organizations basically are almost going bankrupt. A lot of people take money from, especially the rich people. I'm not talking about the poor people. So in old days, there were some sayings saying like this: when people went to borrow money from a bank, so the bank manager would probably ask them something like, uh, "So do you want to pay the money back, or what is your plan? If you have a plan, if you plan to give the money back, there is one thing that, our agreement is going to be of one type, and if you don't have any plan of returning the money, the agreement is going to be, or our understanding is going to be different." So people borrow money from the banking system or financial institutions, that would generally help firms to buy new capital equipments, but those money are basically stolen and kind of sent to other countries or confiscated. So living, even though we have enough savings, not exactly enough savings, even though we have, in many cases we have savings, but those savings are not necessarily going to be converted to capital. So there are some factors that are very specific to developing countries. Do you see what do you see? Do you see the slide, or um,
Sure, we can see the first page.
what does it say?
Contemporary model of development and underdevelopment, chapter 4.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the chapter I'm talking. We're going to discuss now. Okay. So there are a lot of factors very specific to developing countries, and the existing theories does not necessarily the classic theories does not necessarily take into account those factors. So this classic, the contemporary theories that we have, these theories are going to drop some of the assumptions that we make. For example, if you think about returns to diminishing returns, in some cases, diminishing returns, I think Tasfia was asking me this question. In some cases, diminishing returns might not necessarily hold for in many cases.
Pacific Songs is only available with Amazon Music Unlimited. Here's a station based on
Alexa,
smart piano.
I didn't ask you to play a song.
Sure. Here's a custom mix just for
Alexa,
you.
stop that. Alexa, stop that. That stupid thing sometimes just pick up things I didn't say. Probably it hurt me, right? If it is a genuine artificial intelligence, it is going to hunt me down in the future when it has uh, hands and legs. Okay. Are you familiar with Alexa?
Yes, sir.
So
All right. So I mean, so, sometimes it just picks up some stuff that I didn't really say, but it probably heard something like that. Okay, so we are talking about, so when we have one of the assumptions that we have, if you think about even solo growth model, diminishing marginal returns, this might not be may not be the right assumption in some cases. If we have increasing returns, in that case, the existing structure might not actually work. We'll see some examples, which is known as coordination failure. We're going to see that. Um, then we also make assumptions about perfect competition, right? So in developing countries, if you think about the capital market or the market system in general, are not well developed. There are lots of imperfections in the market. I was
Sir,
reading before.
are you still in the introduction page?
Uh, Basically, I'm just talking.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, sir. So I thought you were
Yeah.
referring to a slide,
So
so sorry.
yeah. Okay. I think this might probably help you. So various issues with classic models, observed use differences. So these are the things I was kind of talking in general here, kind of giving you the background. Um, what else do we have here? Okay. So if you think about diminishing marginal returns, for example, and you look at the world, so capital stock in poor countries are lower, right? Generally, that is the case. So if we have diminishing marginal returns as the right assumption, which country will have higher marginal return? Now, developed or developing countries? Developing countries generally have
developing countries.
lower capital lower marginal product. Developing countries generally have lower stock of capital. So if diminishing marginal returns
So
hold, which country will have
developing
higher marginal product of capital?
country,
Developing countries will have higher marginal product of capital. So in that case, you would expect often you would expect capital to flow from rich countries to developing countries, right? But in oftentimes we do receive some FDI or that sort of thing, but oftentimes we see that you're familiar with the capital flight, the concept of capital flight, money flowing away from poor countries to the rich
so in
countries.
developing country,
So money going away from developing countries to developed countries. That's the capital flight. We have this problem, right? A lot of people in Bangladesh, either their legal earnings or illegal earnings are sending their money to foreign countries illegally. So that is basically the capital. That is what we mean by capital flight.
Sir, you just said that a developing economy is most likely to face diminishing returns to scale. So, like, can you just state
No, we are talking about diminishing marginal. So, in economic theory, or if you think about the classic theories, we generally assume capital has diminishing returns. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it is developing or developed economy. So capital has diminishing returns. So if we have diminishing returns to capital, you would expect capital. So since developed countries have higher stock of capital, so marginal product of capital in those countries will be low, right? So
in developed
Yes, yes.
economies?
right, because they have
Okay.
a higher stock of capital. So if
Yes, sir.
diminishing, yeah, if diminishing marginal product of capital, this assumption holds. In that case, you would expect marginal product of capital to be higher in developing countries because developing countries have lower capital stock. So you would expect capital to flow from developed to developing countries. But oftentimes you will see that people from poor countries sending their money to foreign countries. I mean rich countries. So that is the opposite of what would happen uh, if we had marginal product, diminishing marginal returns. So probably the diminishing marginal returns is not necessarily true. Developed countries probably have higher marginal returns. So the decreasing marginal, instead of having decreasing marginal returns, probably there are in some cases there are some evidence of increasing returns to capital. And probably there are some complementary factors that is increasing the returns to capital in developed countries. Now, if you remember the solo growth model, under this whole thing, the assumption of diminishing marginal returns and so on, if you look at these economies, it looks like these economies have, these are rich countries, they have more or roughly they have similar level of similar standard of living, right? Or at least very close. Now, if you
Yes.
add, let's say, for example, Korea, there was a significant difference between standard of living in the 1960s, whereas if you look at 2010 or so, the gap has narrowed a lot between Korea and the other developed countries, right? So this is kind of, if you think about solo growth model, this is a good example. Okay, yeah, it looks like solo growth model has the right conclusion. But if you look at these countries, USA is the top. The top line is USA. This is USA, and the other developing countries are at the bottom here. So it looks like, it doesn't look like we have uh, the poor countries are getting closer to developed countries. Instead, it looks like they are moving in the opposite direction probably, or there is no change in this income in the developing countries. So the idea here is, if you look at this one or this one, solo growth model works fine. But if you look at this one, it doesn't look like that. When you compare the developing countries in general versus the developed countries, the solo growth model's conclusion uh, of the idea that poorer countries will be growing at a faster rate than the rich countries, that doesn't hold here, right? So in this idea,
Hello.
Sir, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, everyone, I got disconnected. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Disconnected. I kept talking to myself. Yeah, I didn't. It took me a while before I realized that I got disconnected. Okay. Let me see what is going on here. Okay. Do you want to take a break? I don't know. I mean, it's 4:02. We can start. Uh, you want to take a break or we
Yes,
should
sir. Yes,
continue?
sir. Break it.
Great.
Okay. So come back at 4:10 p.m. Okay. Come back
Okay,
at
sir.
4:10. Yeah. 10 minutes past 4. Welcome back, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I started. I'm eating a guava. So give me a 1 minute. I'm just going to finish it. Okay.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir, we can.
What do you see on the screen?
Well, the slide on underdevelopment as a coordination failure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So do you have? So do you understand what this coordination failure mean?
No, sir. I guess you were disconnected and we were talking about that.
Okay. So coordination failure basically happens when agents are unable to coordinate their actions. That leads to an outcome making all of them worse off. So if you think about, let's say, let me try to give you an example. So suppose you want to start IT firm. Okay, you want to start a program. You want to start a farm that will develop new programs, new softwares, and sell it to other countries. And some part of some part of the country, Bangladesh, kind of very poor. So you decided to generate employment opportunities for those poor people, and be, uh, if you can give them some jobs, they will, and you can earn some profit, relatively higher profit, if you start a IT firm in that area. You want to export you want to sell those softwares to foreign countries. So you decided to establish a farm in let's say, for example, in Rangpur, Rangpur or Gaibandha region, for example, or Kurigram. That will benefit the people in Kurigram as well as yourself. Now, the problem with this is that if you want to start a farm in Kurigram, you need some people. So you need some people who can develop, develop new softwares, right? You need programmers. Now you came to know that in Koregram, people don't know how to write, how to code, how to write, develop new programs, new softwares. Now the people in Koregram, think about some potential employees. So they were thinking, okay, I don't have a job, so why don't I get a training, or they get a degree to that will teach me how to develop softwares, how to code. But their problem is, okay, if I get this training, there is no one in my area who's going to hire me to develop code, to develop softwares. So I don't have the incentive to learn this new technique or to get this new training that will help me learn how to code, because I'm not going to get a job in my area. At the same time, the potential investor, he is also thinking, okay, there are no people. So Kurigram area does not have coder, so I cannot establish a farm in Kurigram, take the advantage of low wages to make big profit, because they don't have trained people in Kurigram. So I'm not going to start a farm there. This is the coordination failure. If the people in Kurigram have or receive the training, and the investor also invest in Kurigram, both of these groups are going to be better off, right? The investor will earn higher profit because wages in Kurigram is likely to be lower, and the workers in Kurigram will have job opportunities. They will have more jobs. They will be better off. So both groups are better off if they could coordinate their actions. Coordinating means if they were able to come together and decide that, okay, investor is going to invest in the infrastructure to start this farm, and in the meantime we are going to get the training so that we can work for this farm. So if that were possible, both these groups will be better off. But since they cannot do that, or for whatever the reason is, they couldn't coordinate their actions, both of them are worse off. That's coordination failure. Do you understand the idea here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So when actions are complementary, so you will have this sort of coordination failure, and coordination failure leads to multiple equilibrium. One is, in our example, one is bad equilibrium, another is good equilibrium. Bad equilibrium is the scenario where uh, the, the investor does not invest and the people don't get the training. And the good equilibrium would be a situation where investor invests and the people also receive the training to work for the firm. We can represent this coordination failure idea using some simple S-shaped diagram. So we have, in this diagram, uh, we have on the horizontal axis, we have average investment level. And on the vertical axis, we have individually rational rational investment decision or investment level. So this S-shaped line that you see, starting at Y1, this S-shaped line represents the investment decisions by individuals, which depends on the expected level of investment or average level of investment in the economy. So the idea here is that if you see that more people are investing, average level of investment is going up, you will start investing. It is because that will create new opportunities. If you are the only person to start the investment process, and that might actually, you might end up with some negative outcome or making losses. So if we have an investment decisions like this, if you think about, let's say, think about this garment industry, okay? If we have just one garment factory in Bangladesh, so what would happen? Foreign buyers would not be really interested to buy garments from Bangladesh, right? The reason is, they need a lot of garments for their farm. I mean, for to sell in their domestic market. So if there's only one farm with one small farm, that would not be able to supply that buyer uh, with the necessary product. So that buyer might not actually be interested to come to Bangladesh to buy garments from Bangladesh, because it is going to be to buy a few shirts or a few hundred shirts from Bangladesh, even though it is going to be cheaper here, but the additional cost involved in the process of buying the shirt from Bangladesh is going to be much bigger, because there will be some fixed costs if you think about it. Instead, if they have, let's say for example, Vietnam has a lot of farms, garment manufacturers, so they can go there and buy all the product at the same time from the seller there, so they don't have to bear the extra cost. The transaction cost would be relatively lower. Okay. So in this kind of situation, probably, so we'll get to that decision later. But in this kind of situation, government intervention helps the process get moving. I mean, to facilitate the coordinating actions by different individuals or different economic agents. So if you look at this diagram, for example, so we have three possible equilibria here, right? So the individually rational investment decision gap line is given by this S-shaped line. So what happens is, if you think about the intersection at and this line, the straight upward sloping line is the 45-degree line. So if the scales are the same on the vertical and the horizontal axis, each point on the line represents the same value on the vertical and the horizontal axis. So if you think about this first D1 point here, so this is an equilibrium because at D1, individually rational investment is the same as the expected average level of investment. And this is another equilibrium, D2. The same story is true here. And D3 is also an equilibrium. Now here only D1 and D2, only D1 and D3. These two, this one and this one, these two are the stable equilibrium. Stable equilibriums are equilibriums where if the economy, because of some shocks, if we move away from this, if we slightly move away from this equilibrium point, we'll come back to this point. So that's the stable equilibrium. So this is going to be the case both at D1 and D2, D3. But at D2, it's not an equilibrium because if we move slightly to the right of D2, we are going to go to D3. And if we slightly move to the left of D2, we are going to go to D1. So D2 is not a rational equilibrium. So the idea here is that given this situation or this scenario that we have, if an economy is at D1, then there is no, so this is the bad equilibrium and D3 is the good equilibrium. So it is going to be, I mean, we don't really see a way out of D1, right? Because the average investment level is low. Individual investment level decision is also low because they find it to be in the best interest. So how do we move away from D1 to go from D1 to D3? Because D3 is the good equilibrium, high level equilibrium. How do we move there? Move to D3? Generally, in this kind of situation, you would expect government intervention, sometimes helping to move this equilibrium from point D1 to D3. So if you think about, let's say, if you think about the EPZ in Bangladesh, are you familiar with EPZ? Anyone?
No, sir.
নাম
Yes,
শুনছি
sir.
বাট
Yes, sir.
ডিটেলসটা মনে নেই
What is that?
স্যার মানে নামটা শুনছি বাট ডিটেলস মনে নেই
So
It
এটা
is the
basically
export processing
exported.
zone.
Right.
Yeah, EPZ is export processing zone. Okay. So basically, government has established some places in the country. We have some EPZ in Shabar, we have some EPZ in Chittagong, some in I think in
Sernargonj, Adamji,
yeah,
Stravaro আছে স্যার
right. So there are yeah, we have a lot of EPZ. So they
around
will
7-8 EPZ হবে
how many?
7 or 8 around এরকম।
I think probably we will have more. Anyway, so the EPZs are basically specialized area for industrial, for establishing industries, specializing in exporting export items, exporting goods and services. So when Bangladesh government started EPZ initially, so so they will government offered them. So this was kind of expedite the industrialization process or manufacturing, establishing new manufacturing plants. So they gave investors some incentive. So they gave, for example, at the I think sometime in the late 90s or early 2000, government offered them 10 years tax holidays, meaning if you have your business running in these EPZs, the profit or income that you are generating, those income or profits are not going to be taxed for 10 years. So that's a big incentive for the farms, right? I mean, if you think about that farms have to pay taxes. So this tax incentive, this is going to give them some incentive to establish start a new business, manufacturing, export manufacturing business in those areas. Plus, this episode also had some, additional features. They would probably have some banks or other institutions or other organizations to facilitate their business process. So these things will expedite the industrialization process. That was the idea. So government intervention or government incentive can actually alleviate some of the problems that farms would find, or to give farms the incentive to get invest. So if you think about this diagram, for example, so if we are initially at point D1, one option is give the farm or give the potential individual some incentives so that this line, this S-shaped line shifts upward. Okay. Now, if this line shifts upward, so basically all we have to do, give them enough incentives so that the average investment level moves to the right of point D2, right? Because whenever you give some incentive, that's costly. So tax holidays means government will not have any, will not earn any revenue from tax revenue from those funds. So that's a cost to the government, even though government will offering them different kinds of services. So government is losing revenue. So we don't want government to continue to support this type of programs forever. We just want to make sure that the program is large enough or program is strong enough to move the average level of investment slightly to point D2. Once we reach once we go beyond point D2, the economy will move to the new equilibrium D3 on its own. So basically, we want to reach D3, but at the lowest possible cost. Okay. Any questions? So we have a more formal, model proposed by. The model was proposed sometime in sometime in 1943 by Paul Rosenstein-Rodan. So it is known as the Big Push model. In
Sir.
1980, yes.
Sir, could you explain the part again where we said that D2 is not a preferred equilibrium? Why is D2 not a preferred equilibrium?
D2 is not a stable equilibrium. D2 is not a stable equilibrium. It's because if we move slightly to the right because of some shock, or slightly to the left because of some shock, then the economy will no longer come back to D2. The economy will go to D1 if we move slightly to the left, and if we move slightly to the right, the economy will go to D3. That's why D2 is not a stable equilibrium. So D2 is not a point of interest
স্যার
as
কেন
an
মুভ করতে পারবো
equilibrium
না?
Why not?
Yes, sir.
So let's. So I don't have a pen right now. I mean, I can you turn on the other laptop. I'm kind of being lazy today, so it's not going to be easy to draw something on on this graph. So we'll talk about this using the other. I mean, when I use the other laptop. Okay, it will be easier for me to draw and show all the lines, necessary lines. So we'll talk about this again in the next class. Okay.
Okay,
In
sir.
the meantime, you can take read the textbook a little bit. That will explain it, but it's not really too complicated to understand why D2 is not a stable equilibrium. But anyway, I'll show you in the next class, because to explain it well, I need to draw graph. I mean, I need to draw some lines and everything here. So it's without a touch screen, it's difficult. So the laptop that I'm using right now, it's not a touch screen one. As I said, I'm kind of being lazy today.
Sure, sir. We can discuss it in the next class.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll show you. In the meantime, read a little bit. Read the textbook a little bit. It's not going to be difficult, but we'll definitely talk about this again in the next class. But just keep this in mind for now, that D2 is the unstable equilibrium. So we are not really interested in D2 as an equilibrium point. Instead, we are interested at point D2 as a threshold point that would help us identify a policy option so that we can move to the good equilibrium with the minimum cost possible. That's a lot of words, I guess. Okay. Now, Paul Rosenstein, yeah. Paul
Sir.
Rosenstein-Roden, yes.
Sir, can there be more than 3 equilibria?
Go ahead. Can we what?
Can there be more than 3 equilibriums?
We can have more than 3 equilibrium, but let me see. That is we can have more than 3 equilibrium. That is technically possible. Okay, but if you think about it, so the S-shaped line makes a little bit is more reasonable than having a line with multiple moving in zigzag direction, like going up and down like that. That is not really that reasonable, unless you have some strong reason to believe that that is how the privately rational investment decisions are going to be determined. But this is a rational decision in the sense that as the investment at the lower level of investment, average investment level, return is going to be much higher. So privately rational investment decisions indicate that people will have a larger incentive, or people will move to a higher level of investment relatively faster. Once you reach a threshold level like D2 or something like that, so the returns, additional benefit that you are going to get is going to get smaller and smaller. So the line becomes convex, meaning investment levels gets it increases, but at a slower rate. So this is a reasonable, I mean, if you think about it intuitively, this is a reasonable line to explain the investment decisions of individuals. But you can have other scenarios, or that would be difficult to come by, but technically you can draw a line indicating more than 3 equilibrium points.
Got it, sir.
Where were we? Yeah. So Paul Rosenstein-Roden, I proposed this idea of big push sometime in the 1940s, and then sometime in the 1940s first. Then it was formalized by a paper by Murphy, Vishnu, and Schleifer. They wrote a theoretical paper kind of formalizing this idea, and which was later on simplified, proposed a simplified version of the same idea by Paul Krugman. I believe you know Paul Krugman, right? Nobel laureate economist Paul Krugman. He kind of presented a simplified version of this complex theoretical paper, explaining how big push, this idea of big push is going to work. So if you look at this model, so because of this coordination failure, there might be some market coordination failure might lead to market failure, and government might need to intervene in the market or in the system to lead the market to a good equilibrium. And in the people in the developing countries, the government, especially the government in the developing countries, like this big push idea because that gives them some legitimacy to spend more money on different projects. In Bangladesh, for example, we have a lot of development projects, right? So this big push model kind of justify or give them some justification for government intervention or government extra expenditure that government is running. So in this model, we have some assumptions that we are going to start with. So we have just, again, this is a very simplified version of the complex model. So we have just one factor of production in here. We have two sectors with n types of product. Okay, two sectors with n types of product. We have one traditional sector and another modern sector. And in the traditional sector, if you think about the production function, the traditional sector production function is very simple. 1 unit of labor produces 1 unit of output. And the modern sector is a bit complex, where the amount of labor required to produce output is given by this. So if you have Q amount of output to produce, you need a fixed amount of investment F, and then you need a C amount of labor for each unit of output produced, additional C amount of labor. So C is less than 1, meaning it is, so basically if compared to traditional sector, once you make this fixed investment of F, modern sector can produce output at a lower cost once you made the investment here. Okay, so it's slightly complicated than the traditional sector production function, but it's simple. It is also simple. And the other assumptions that we have here is that consumers spend an annual equal amount of their income on each type of good. We have a closed economy, no foreign trading, and we have perfect competition with traditional farms. And the monopolist works like so the modern farm works like a monopolist, but it has a maximum. It has a price limit. It cannot charge above the price the traditional farms are charging, because if it does, then traditional farms will take over and monopolists will lose everything. And there are certain conditions for multiple equilibria to have. So this big push model basically is on the idea that we have multiple equilibria scenario. So there are different conditions that leads to multiple equilibria. We're going to talk about that. And a big push in this kind of situation, we might need a big push to push the economy to a good equilibrium because of this following factors: intertemporal effects, urbanization effects, infrastructure effects, and training effects. So this is our diagram for for big push model. So I want you to take a look at the diagram and please read the textbook. The textbook will explain it very well, but if we're definitely going to talk about this one in the next class. Since it is 4:40, I'm going to stop here unless you have any questions. Any questions?
No, sir.
Am I in? Okay, I was thinking, okay, I disconnected again.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, আমরা HTG 10 year reducing equalities নিয়ে কাজ করতে যাচ্ছি।
SDG what?
10 HTG 10 নিয়ে কাজ করতে যাচ্ছি।
SDG 10.
Yes, sir.
I mean, if no one picked it up, then I mean, you have to write it down. To take a look
Yes,
at
sir.
the.
Yes, sir. I will have.
Yeah, take a look at the list and write it down. Okay, Sadia, Shravanti, Oishi, I guess. Team Amigos. Can you hear me? Or someone from Team Amigos? I think someone from Team Amigos. Mashhurina Tasrian. Okay, we'll talk about this in the next class. So when you write someone, so all of you, if you are working on SDGs, when you write the SDGs, you should start with the SDG 1, SDG 2, SDG 3, then write down the other part. Okay, so that would be easier for us to follow what SDGs are, which SDG it is, because sometimes it's we get confused which one is what number. So I know, for example, we know what is SDG 1, what is SDG 4, because it depends on our interest, which area we're interested in. But there are 17 SDGs, so we don't really, I mean, I didn't really memorize the whole thing, but I encourage you to memorize the whole thing, because you would be working, if you are working in development economics, you would be working on this sort of things for a long time. Okay, if you don't have any questions, feel free to log out. We'll talk on Thursday again.
Okay, sir.